Do you remember when your mom used to say, let's be part of the Empty Clean Plate Club, clean your plate, eat your veggies? Yeah, I do. My mom didn't have too much trouble pushing me to finish my food because I quite enjoy food. However, I do remember back in the day, kids having to listen to their parents, clean your plate, let's join the Clean Plate Club. Now imagine if it's not your parents, but in fact the government that is forcing you to clean that plate.
为啥你还没吃完了?
What would you think about that? Well, you don't have to think too hard because in China, there's an actual operation set up by the CCP, the Communist Party of China, called Operation Empty Plate. Now, before you guys go on, oh, I've heard about this in the news, this is a really, really, really old thing. This happened in like 2013. Dictator for life Xi Jinping, the leader of China, he actually set up this campaign called Operation Empty Plate. And the idea was to tie it into the anti-corruption campaign in the Communist Party of China. China is well known for having abhorrent levels of corruption at all levels of society, but specifically in the Communist Party of China. Now, in my experience of 10 years in China, I've been to plenty of not only government banquets, but just banquets in general where there's food on display. And you might think that China, being not America, wouldn't be a very wasteful society. You're talking about a country where people, up until fairly recently, had a huge problem with food shortages and poverty and malnourishment and hunger. Still happens in some places in the countryside, but is largely solved, per se, nowadays. Now, you would think a country like this would have a very frugal attitude towards food. You might think of it like a country that's getting on its feet, but still remembers the harsh days of the past. And this might very well be the problem, because China is in fact the most wasteful, food wasteful country I've ever been to in my entire life. It makes America blush. When you go out to dinner with Chinese guests, specifically government officials, they will order the most unbelievable spread you've ever seen in your life. We're talking dish after dish after dish after dish. And this idea is that if you have too little food on the table, then you've lost face. You've lost face in front of your guests. They're going to think you're stingy. It's not part of Chinese culture. But it mostly stems from the fact that in China, because of communism, because of Chairman Mao's famines that killed millions and millions and millions of people, people now celebrate the fact that food is so cheap and accessible. So the fact that they have disposable income, the idea that you can flaunt your wealth and flaunt the fact that you can buy a ton of food is very appealing, especially for the older generation. This also ties directly in that Communist Party officials in China hold some of the highest rankings or highest social status in China, it being a one-party state. It's very important if you are a government official to put on lavish feasts and things like this. So this kind of carried over from like communist dictatorship, like corruption techniques over and spilled over into the population. So again, showing off of food, if you compare it to somewhere like Taiwan, that's also Chinese culture, it's much more prevalent in mainland China to order a ton of food, waste a ton of it. Most of the time it's considered, like a loss of face if you wrap up that food and bring it home. Oftentimes my mother-in-law would actually say like, oh, I'm going to give this to homeless people, or oh, whatever, if she actually wanted to bring food home, because it's kind of considered like, oh, you're so poor you have to bring home the leftovers. If you're doing it in front of a family, it's different, but definitely around strangers, you wouldn't wrap up the food and bring that home. Now, to tie it back to Chairman for Life, Winnie the Pooh, Xi Jinping, in 2013, he made this empty plate campaign because he was scouring the country of corruption. Actually, in reality, what Xi Jinping was doing was consolidating power so that he could rule for the rest of his life, however long that may be. And the corruption wasn't stamped out. He was just getting rid of political rivals and putting on a display of getting rid of corrupt officials. When in fact, I know many people that were working in the government / still work in the government back then. And the corruption didn't stop, guys. It didn't go anywhere. But we always talk about this idea in China that if you say you're going to do something and you show a little example or something to the public, then it means that it's done. So this Operation Empty Plate campaign was to crack down on corrupt officials in their banquets with their expensive cognac and their huge spreads, and said, okay, if you're going to have a banquet, you can only have 2 or 3 dishes. And actually, Chairman Xi went on like media and was showing eating like very frugal dishes and meals to set an example for the populace. Now, that's all well and good. The problem is that it's being brought back. That never actually happened. Like, they did this huge crackdown on like you can only, if you're a government official, you can only order a certain amount of dishes. I never saw that in action. There were still opulent displays of food at every single time I was out with anyone in the government or any situation really. What happened was they decided to keep that law in place, never really enact it, but now definitely they want to enact it. And the reason is you might have heard about the horrendous flooding that is affecting millions and millions of people in south central China. So we're talking Hubei region, Chongqing region, Three Gorges Dam region, all the way down into Guangxi and Jiangxi. A lot of these regions are dealing with severe, horrific flooding right now, and that's in a huge farming area, almost like a breadbasket of China. So a lot of the crops are getting wiped away. You see tons of food spoilage and the crops that are completely decimated. And that's an issue because China actually imports up to 30% of its food, which for a country like a big country like that with 1.4 billion people to feed is a massive number. It's huge. They pretty much import all their soybeans from Brazil and the US. There's so many food imports that are very important. And with a trade war and getting hit with sanctions and things like this, it's really hurting food trade. Number two, with this whole flood thing, all the domestic production, a lot of it's being damaged, and it's becoming a very, very harsh reality. So right now, Chairman Xi basically says he didn't talk about food shortage. He didn't address the flooding or food shortage or anything like this. What he did was he said we have to be frugal in the way we eat. We shouldn't be wasting food. And he wants to enact this law again, but actually amongst normal citizens as well. But not only are they targeting like this is how much food you can eat, they're also targeting like how it's promoted. So you guys might know about like mukbangs or whatever in South Korea. It's where like somebody eats on camera. I think it's freaking disgusting. Who wants to hear like smacking noises and stuff? It's okay if you're having a conversation or whatever, but like just shoving your mouth full of food and just eating exorbitant amounts of food, I don't see the appeal. But anyway, it's wildly popular in China. And the kind of mukbangs that are usually most popular in China are just outlandish ones. There's this guy that will cook a whole camel or a whole cow or whatever. Like he'll put together these elaborate presentations of food, but it's clear that it's not going to be eaten by that many people. So it's just a ton of food waste, right? You have people eating like rare sea life and really disgusting stuff too. Live animals, obviously, which I won't even show here. It's just these mukbangs, this culture on Douyin and these other streaming sites in China is a really important part of internet culture. And that is being threatened to be cracked down on because it's promoting food waste, right? If you're not going to finish all your food, or if you're ordering too much food, it's even carried over into a restaurant that, well, they tried this. They tried to enact this thing where an AI system will read your body type and weight and stuff and analyze how many calories you should consume, which is so 1984. It's scary because it actually like plans out your meal. You go into this restaurant, you stand on a scale, like scans you and stuff, and then it says, okay, you can only have this much food. And that was in direct response of the Empty Plate campaign. Like, no joke, this is a direct response. I believe it was in Hunan, a very nationalist place, that was following Chairman Xi's orders very directly. So initially, like, people were kind of interested in this idea. They're going to this restaurant, but the netizens went ape. They were so pissed off. They actually had to make a public apology and shut it down because it was so offensive to people that they had to get weighed and scanned to eat what they want to eat, right? They don't even get to control their own diet. So yeah, I mean, this whole campaign is to be thrifty and diligent and promote empty plates. What it really is a response, an unsuccessful response, let me tell you. This isn't going to change anything in society. An unsuccessful response to the fact that there are serious, dire problems of food shortages. I'm not doom and gloom, I'm not saying China's starving right now. But pork prices, meat prices are through the roof. Grain storages are getting lower. And it is a real issue, especially with all the natural disasters and flooding and stuff. So it's funny to see this hilarious nanny state law be reenacted after it failed the first time. And that's something I want everyone to understand, is that China is, for all intents and purposes, moderately civil society without law. The problem is there is no real rule of law in China. So a lot of these huge propaganda campaigns, like the Empty Plate campaign, or like getting rid of motorcycles out of cities, or like the Civilized City Award that pretty much every city in China always receives. All of these things are just temporary band-aids that never really amount to social change. I mean, look at the Good Samaritan law that was put in place in Shenzhen. Before, you had the situation where if you if somebody was hurt and you went over to help them, you're liable for their medical bills. You could be liable for much more than that. That was there was public outcry. It was crazy. Like the netizens were going ape about that, especially when that little girl got run over. And it actually went into a law. The problem is, where does it go from there? So the law was enacted, but it's never really used. You still see these horrible, horrible things where people are liable for other people's injuries when they didn't in fact do them, and all of these scams surrounding that. It's still a massive part of China. And you can talk about how China is changing and all this kind of development and stuff, but society might be going through changes, but the government really never does go through any changes other than more and more and more and more control. And whether that control works in these kind of spheres, like the empty plate campaign or not, remains to be seen. But one thing we can be sure of is like the surveillance state is real now. It's straight up real. It's a part of everyday life now. And it's gotten to a point where it's very hard to get reliable information out of China because the communication is just so blocked off and shut down. Hope you guys found that interesting. I hope it clears up some of this food shortage conversation. I want to say thanks to all the people supporting me on patreon.com/Lau86. It's been brutal with some of the ad policies. I have gotten so many videos demonetized these days, and it's just ridiculous. I don't know if it's YouTube being sensitive, advertisers being sensitive, but I don't let that dictate what my content is. So if I have to throw a couple of videos to the AdSense gods and I don't receive any payment, that is what it is, because I have people on Patreon that actually support the channel. So huge shout out to you guys. You make this all worthwhile. And I talk to you guys directly there every single day. Over my morning coffee, I talk to everyone on Patreon that sends me a message. So that's a great way to communicate with me there too. I want to say thank you so much, Law Winners, and I'll catch you on the next one.